Welcome everyone to the session on conversational systems on the web. Today we have a really nice group of people as panelists from different backgrounds and who will bring in different perspectives. And let me start introducing our panel first. So we have Eugene Agistang from Amazon and Emory University. We have Mark Sanderson from RMIT University, Julia Kiseleva from Microsoft, and Idan Szpektor from Google. So before we start, I'll first ask for introductions from our panelists. If they could please introduce themselves, give a bit of background about their work and the research they do. And then we'll follow up with several questions. In the meantime, if there's any question from the audience, please do feel free to type in the chat window here. I'll be following that, and I'll be directing these questions to our panelists as well. Okay, could I please have some introductions from our panelists? Shall we start with Eugene?
I think you can.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. So, happy to be here. So I'm, as I'm an assistant professor at Emory University, and currently I'm part-time research scientist at Amazon in a position called Amazon Scholar. I come to this area from traditional web search and question answering and information retrieval sort of background. I'm very, for the last few years, I've been working on sort of trying to expand search to support more open-ended conversation and feedback, and as part of it, and this is going to be one of the things I was specifically asked to discuss. I participated in the Amazon Alexa Prize, first as a participant and currently as a co-organizer of the new Alexa Prize Challenge, which I'll talk about later today. So very excited to be here and sort of share the perspective of crossing over from search to conversational search. Thank you.
Thanks, Eugene. Julia, do you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah, I am a researcher in Microsoft, and similar to Eugene, I came to this field originally from information retrieval, where I was mostly interested in understanding the search queries, and particularly was very driven towards understanding what user really wants to say to us and try to incorporate it as an evaluation metrics. And that's gradually led me to the conversational assistance at the moment was as a Cortana. And as of maybe 4 to 5 years, I'm going deeper into the aspects of dialogue systems. And specifically, I'm also interested here to trying to understand what's actually the objective functions of the users. And so how can we use that to optimize our systems? And just at the moment, I'm also switching my focus towards grounded understanding, and we have actually just really freshly accepted challenge at NeurIPS, where we will try to have players play the game in Minecraft, conversing with each other, and trying to incorporate both signals as a world and as a language. That's it.
Thanks, Julia. Mark, would you like to go next?
So, Dobro jutro, Slovenia. Dobro večer from Melbourne. So my name is Mark Sanderson. I work at RMIT University in the city of Melbourne here in Australia. My focus over the years that I've been a researcher, I also, like Julia and Eugene, come out of the information retrieval community. In terms of conversational search, the kinds of things that we do down here in Melbourne focus principally on sort of the usability of conversational search systems. And in collaboration with researchers at UMass Amherst, we've got a project working on non-factoid question answering systems. So trying to go beyond the kinds of questions that, for example, a Google Home or an Amazon Alexa might be able to answer. And then perhaps just looking a little further back, I've also been involved in offline evaluation, and a few years ago, working with a bunch of researchers, we created an offline evaluation data set called the Session Track of Trek, which perhaps has some precursors to some of the testing ideas that we think about now when we're doing offline evaluation of these systems.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Mark. And Idan?
Thanks. Hi, I'm Idan Szpektor. I'm a research scientist at Google. My background is NLP, specifically textual entailment. But I was several years a researcher at Yahoo and was working on community question answering and its relationship to search. And at Google now I'm leading a team working on conversational AI. Specifically, we're focusing on informational dialogues. For example, how do you take what you would usually do on a search page or search engine and conversationalize it through voice-only devices or voice-primarily devices. Both the aspects of exploring a domain, but also from educational perspectives and metrics and values.
Interesting. Thanks, Idan. Okay, thank you very much for the introductions from our panelists, and I would like to specifically thank you again for being here, because I know for our panelists it's actually quite late or very early morning in the day. So one question I had at the very beginning of our panel is about the open research areas. What do you think are the main research areas, open research areas that are related to the design of conversational systems on the web? What are the things that you think people should be focusing on at the moment? Who would like to start? Julia, would you like to go first?
Sure. I would not be super original. I would say that it's evaluation, of course. So I don't think we have, at the moment, still a very good and stable way to evaluate the dialogue systems on the web. So, and especially that bothered me for a while, coming from IR community, where we have a strong ways and metrics and a methodology of evaluation. So it's a little bit more difficult due to different circumstances, because dialogue systems are actually way more different. Like we talk about task-oriented, which are easier to relate, and chit-chat, which is sort of harder, but I think we're making a great progress with that. And I'm really happy to see how community is shaping from automatic metrics to actually go into the human evaluation. That's at the moment much harder to get any paper accepted at NLP venues if you don't have any human evaluation. But I still think that's a way to go for us to come up with a better way to evaluate dialogue systems. So I would call for evaluation.
Thanks, Julia. Yes, evaluation definitely is one of the most important issues, I agree, and the data sets associated with evaluation that hopefully we'll discuss a little bit more later in this panel as well. Mark, would you like to go next?
Sure, thanks. I mean, look, the other a topic that some of my students have been working on is clarification. So conversations, particularly if you're seeking information, then often that in the case of factoid questions, there tends to be a lot of clarity around the question that's asked and the answer that's required. But if you go on, say, Stack Exchange, Stack Overflow, and you see people having conversations to try and deal with more complex questions. Clarifications are a big part. Eugene's done some work in that space. One of my students is currently looking at topics in that space. So there's all sorts of different kinds of clarifications. You can see Microsoft Bing is throwing up clarification questions occasionally. But they, I think, would also tell you that there's an awful lot of work still to be done on how you sort of provide good clarifications to questions, and what sort of responses might come back. I mean, that would be one example anyway. This is a very rich area where there's huge amounts of opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, how to provide the clarification questions, and also when to clarify, to ask the question, I guess, because you may also be potentially disturbing the user while you are trying to get more information. So that trade-off and how to handle this, I agree, it's a very important research area. Idan, would you like to go next?
So I think one of the interesting aspects of dialogue is that the information you would usually see on the screen, it's really hard to convey it through a dialogue. So we have to find better ways to take the results from a search engine or a retrieval mechanism and turn it into something that we can actually say as part of a dialogue. Again, especially when you have narrow type of attention span. If you're driving a car, or even when you're looking at your phone and talking to it, you have only a very small place when you can put the information. Can you summarize it correctly? Can you put it in the context of whatever was already been sent as a dialogue? And of course, now that we're looking a lot on and having a lot of attention on large language models, how can we ground them correctly in a robust way? And we can make sure that if we use, for example, these kinds of mechanisms to provide the output at the end, we want to start hallucinating or making mistakes when we generate the responses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Oh, sorry. Did anyone want to add something?
Sure. I think I in addition to I agree with the previous ones and suggestions, and if I had to pick one research area, it would be dialogue management, specifically mixed initiative sort of dialogue management for conversational search, where unlike search, traditional web search, which tends to be more passive and sort of trying to understand what the user is trying to do, and there's an opportunity in conversational search, as Mark was saying, one clarification question is one to sort of drive the search session towards some goal, right? So clarification is one way to do it, but there are many others in which a system might try to sort of lead the user towards accomplishing a task, or for example, giving advice or solving a problem, which requires, again, sort of both understanding the state of the conversation, sort of user modeling, and the state of the task to hopefully drive the user or assist the user towards the right conclusion. So I think there's a lot more opportunity to be proactive and and I think there's in my opinion, a lot of exciting research to be done in that direction.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Idan. Thanks, Eugene. Yes, these are definitely some of the open areas that, in a sense, they are also relatively new areas that people have started looking into, I guess. How do you convey information through a screen and through just voice, for example? And how do you display, or how do you communicate with the user in an effective way through this very small means, sometimes very small screens, for example, as well as how to help users complete their tasks? I guess these are things that we had started looking into a little bit in context of search, for example, as well, but they are still relatively new, and there is a lot of work that needs to be done in these areas. I agree. Actually, one related question to this, now that we have been talking about this, the research challenges related to conversational systems on the web, there has been already quite a lot of work on dialogue systems, for example, conversational Q&A, and these are basically quite old in a sense research areas people have spent many years looking into. I was just wondering, now that we are switching more towards like conversational systems in the web and conversational search and things like that are becoming more common, how do you see the current challenges being different than the work that has been done already in these areas of like dialogue systems and conversational Q&A? We have already briefly mentioned that, but I thought it might be good to make the differentiation between what existed and what were the research challenges people were already looking into, and what's new and unique to the systems that we are seeing at the moment. Idan, would you like to go first?
Sure. So I'll put in maybe two perspectives in this question. So first of all, conversational QA is only one aspect. It's not a dialogue. It's only one aspect of a dialogue. And when you're looking at a whole dialogue, there are so many other elements when you interact with each other. We can answer questions, but we can also, ask questions back, add more information. As we say, ask clarification questions, and add more chit chat just to build trust and engagement within ourselves. And I think this is something that's currently missing. So Eugene mentioned mixed initiative. This is really one of the ways to incorporate all these kind of features of a dialogue, is to figure out how do we mix them together within a single conversation. And I think here information retrieval could be thought not only for answering questions, but also adding other things. So you can ask yourself, can I add additional information using retrieval? Can I add questions if I can generate leading questions from the information that I have or can retrieve that's related? So that's one aspect. I think another interesting perspective of this new direction is indeed the different modalities that we have. So suppose even if we have a screen, even a big one, and we still can talk to the agent while we're searching, what should be the voice part versus the visual part? How do we mix them together? I can put a lot of information and just have a navigational voice. I can add some pieces of like highlights. Might be easier for the user to convey first before it glances of a lot of blue links. So I think this is also a very new and interesting direction to take.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Idan. The issue about the different type of devices or modalities, and I guess we may have more systems coming into our lives because we have seen a change in how people access information in terms of devices, and then what people expect and how to use this, how to communicate this information through these different interfaces, modalities, and so on. I think that's a really fascinating area. Actually, there's a lot of opportunities there. Thanks. Mark, would you like to go next?
Sure. And look, the thing that crosses my mind, just to build on what Idan was saying, is, why are we having this conversation with the video on? We're doing it because we can sort of see each other's reactions. Emine, you were kind of using your hands earlier, and it was just there to emphasize something more sort of firmly. So that those kind of opportunities around multimedia are also sort of other opportunities. Your question was about information. What's different from dialogue systems? I think it's just the potential of the breadth of domains. So I think dialogue systems. I remember booking cinema tickets when I was a student on the phone. And these kind of touch button dialogue systems would help me book to go and see whatever it was, Independence Day. But these days, you might hope that the same system can help you deliver a whole range of different goals, a whole range of different things. So it's that sort of breadth of domain. But it's always worth remembering that the reason that these systems are we always keep coming back to these systems is it seems to be something that people really like interacting with. I see it in my own family that they find these kind of conversational systems, if they work reliably, they just prefer interacting with them. They feel that the systems are much better. They don't like using web-based systems as much. So the other sort of difference with, I guess, is the constant that goes on here is that there's a continual there's a desire, I think, in people to have these systems work successfully, because it's a mode of interaction that we find very natural.
Yeah, I agree. I guess this natural way of interaction is very related to the breadth, because indeed these systems are becoming more and more embedded into our everyday lives. And we don't see them, like you were saying, Mark, I guess we don't see them as necessarily search engines or a different system. It's part of our lives now. And that's why the breadth is indeed becoming a lot wider. And then we always expect new things probably from these devices, which raises different research challenges, because we are using these devices for different things. These systems are being used for many different types of things or tasks now. Eugene, would you like to go next?
Sure. So absolutely, the breadth of the tasks is much bigger than traditional dialogue systems, also because, as you said, the devices are embedded, right? So the context in which the information is requested, right, it becomes quite important. So user driving is much more likely to be using a dialogue system driving in a car, which changes the kinds of requests versus sort of traditional ones sitting in front of a desktop. Second, sorry. Right, and the other issue is the expectations are of the sort of supporting open domain conversations, right? So those are traditionally dialogue systems that are typically on one, they might be really good ones, or even more generally, right? So Google has over time, as an example of a search engine, or Bing, right, supports not just search, but calculations or any sort of kinds of things that actually have nothing to do with search, because that's where people just have a box and they start typing into it, right, and not sort of specifically have a one window open for search and one for everything else. So similarly, the digital, or sort of conversational search systems or digital assistants have to be ready to support things that actually have nothing to do with search gracefully, right? So this is a challenge that I think that hasn't really had to be handled by traditional dialogue systems, sort of open domain, or so supporting pretty much any kind of request.
Yeah, so the breadth, again, of interactions, I guess, and the different types of requests indeed bring in different challenge and different research problems associated with this. Thanks, Eugene. Julia, would you like to go next?
Sure. I must say that I agree with many things that the previous speaker said. So actually, wanted to add about the clarification questions. It's definitely like mixed initiative, an interesting area, and also kind of very different from a traditional web-based search. However, I think we can learn a lot of interesting things which people has done there, because it was much more closed system. For example, when I was first time attempting solving the problem of clarification question, we arranged a challenge for that and released the data set for open domain clarification question and my initial idea was actually that in the web search is sort of solved by diversification of the results. And that's super nice, because the interface was very clear. I think that coming closer to your question, like the difficulty at the moment is also that it's more natural interaction, and then by more natural interaction, we need to take into account different modalities as well, and which was said already. And that's what also I will vote for actually not just being able to understand the language, but ground this language in some sort of other channels. And another directional things which we are not really solved yet is actually engaging sort of conversation, because because we also need to kind of define what we're talking about. If we talk about assistants like Alexa, it's still she's skill based, so she can definitely help me. I don't even imagine my kitchen anymore without Alexa, but that's a request type of interactions most of the time. So, and I think that the next thing is actually being able to understand tasks which I'm having. Maybe even I don't understand that I have this task, and try to assist me as much as possible. So that's doesn't need to be engaged in terms of that I need to spend more time with that, but that's the assistant will help me to accomplish the task by bringing up some knowledge which I might even not have at the moment.
Thanks, Julia. Yes, that's quite interesting actually, because in web search we also spend quite a bit of time when we try to complete a task. We spend some time trying to understand what subtasks or what are the things I need to do to complete the task, and that's indeed a big part of the finding process. And then once you conceptualize what you need to do to complete the task, then you try to do it. That's another step. But I guess what you were suggesting is that the systems could themselves help the person understand what are the subtasks that needs to be completed without necessarily the user completing it. Again, that's probably the task of the system to help complete the task, but that's a big help from the user, from the system, that needs to be still kind of thought about by the system itself as opposed to by the user. And
yes. Exactly. And just one of the aspects of the dialogue system, which is super interesting and novel compared to previous IR systems, they can be proactive. They can actually clarify that they don't have enough information asking me a sort of question. If they deviate and they still not sure which answer to return, they can ask me that. And that's very different from traditional IR, and that's also very, very nice. And that's definitely an area we should explore more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, clarification questions and being proactive. Definitely, these are actually, we see that there are certain themes that keep arising, and it's quite kind of interesting to see that these are definitely, they look like open problems that we definitely need to pay attention into, such as being proactive, asking clarification questions, for example, evaluation, interaction when there are different modalities, and displaying or conveying information when there are different modalities. These all seem to be some of the research challenges that throughout our discussion have been raised several times, and definitely seem to be open problems for our community to work on. Thanks, Julia. So one related question. This is something that I am actually that is not clear to me. Maybe it's more clear to our panelists, and that's one thing I wanted to raise regarding conversational search, because conversational search is actually a way of devising conversational systems for the web, on the web, and it's an area that many researchers have recently started working on. But the definition of conversation search, how it differs from other conversational systems or traditional search systems, and what is conversational search, that has been a little bit vague. I think this was actually also something that was raised in the Dagstuhl seminar that was organized. Mark was one of the organizers there, and that was raised. It was raised there as well. But I wanted to raise that question again here. What is conversational search? Do you think we have clarified the definition of conversation search fully? What do you think is conversational search, and how do you see it differ from like traditional dialogue systems or traditional search systems? Mark, would you like to go first? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Why not? I mean, we had that Dagstuhl meeting just before the pandemic. Actually, I think that was the last time I traveled, and November 2019. So there's a Dagstuhl report, and in there, I think you'll find it was a big learning experience, because what we discovered was a huge overlap in research. So, the information retrieval people turned up and expected the dialogue people to be of a particular kind, and it turned out they were, doing things that we hadn't appreciated. The dialogue people hadn't appreciated that the IR people were doing things. The NLP people were coming to it from maybe from other angles, but I think it was very clear that most of the groups, the question answering people, say from NLP, the dialogue people, the information retrieval people, were probably all converging, but they'd all maybe started from slightly different places, but they were all converging to something quite similar. So I think that's essentially what's going on. I think somewhere in the report there's a kind of a diagram of different groups starting and then sort of reaching some common point. And I don't think we'd appreciated how much we were overlapping actually. So what does IR bring? IR brings maybe a domain generality. What does NLP bring? Well, it brings a deeper understanding of language. What does dialogue bring? Well, it brings an understanding of the sort of a typology of the acts that go on between people. But each of those three fields have been converging onto this kind of common view of conversational search. I haven't answered your question. I've just told you that three different groups have all been trying to get there. Actually, I was talking to quite a prominent information retrieval researcher, Bruce Croft, a few years ago, and he was actually sort of saying, have you ever seen the Knowledge Navigator video from Apple from 1987? He said, that's what I've been aiming at for most of my career, which is a sort of an executive assistant almost, something that provides answers, but to questions, but does it in a wide variety of different ways. Conversational search is avoiding those what we might now think of as traditional qualities of a search engine, which is a search engine result page or queries that you type in. Conversational search is heading towards something quite different, which is what we're doing now, which is to having interactions with the goals of learning something. So I think conversational search is probably turning into something that merges into a wide range of other kinds of systems, which is probably why the Dagstall meeting brought all of these different research groups together. It kind of turns information retrieval on its head, because I think it's very easy to think that IR is just about you type in a query, you get a search engine result page, you design the search engine result page in different ways, you use A/B testing to decide which one is going to work. And that's it. That's the goal. But actually, that was never the goal. It was just a convenient interim stage. But the conversational search is actually something much more complex, and essentially conversation with the goal of learning some new information.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Mark. I guess this is also related to these tasks, the type of the expectations being very broad from these systems, right? In a sense, that makes it hard to just say, okay, there is a search and then we expect a ranked list of results, because it's very different. You can use these systems in many different ways.
Yes. I was just going to say, yes, but I think it's always to remember that the search engine result page is just a technically convenient way of presenting information to people. As we've benefited in information retrieval from the skills of the language technologies research that comes out of the NLP community. We're getting better at identifying not just top 10 documents, but actually a passage of text that could answer your particular question. Therefore, this kind of halfway house of showing the top 10 results with little snippets is not as necessary as it used to be.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks, Mark. Anyone else who would like to add?
I can add a couple. First of all, I agree with Mark that I would not like to have like special definition for that. It's better if communities will work together on this topic. That's when we can achieve exactly impressive amount of progress in this direction. To myself, I was always thinking about that was thinking about it for a while. So I think if we say conversational search, it's one person has a sort of information-seeking task when there should be information retrieved. So there's a different types of dialogue systems which people enjoy a lot. Is what is called like personal system. There's quite a popular application as a startup still, where people can talk to their friend and they feel better about this. So like it's a pure dialogue system. However, I also imagine that there is a scenario there when you ask your dialogue system to be to answer some of the information thinking things. Another aspect of the dialogue systems, which now start playing a role more and more, we see research of actually being able to provide empathic dialogue systems where you have some sort of personality. But I think it's a long-standing goal. So the short answer, I would not divide or say that conversational search is something standing alone. It's better when many communities drive it together. But to me, when you say search, there's an information-seeking need where you can help users.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that an interesting, new direction maybe emerges from us talking to digital agents is that when we are looking at a search pane and we type a query, even if it's in a session and we can think about it as a conversation, we always ask the agent, ask the search agent to provide information that's related to what I said explicitly in my query. But if I'm talking to an agent, in a more, it could be a human-to-human conversation, right? Not necessarily an agent. Can we have a search agent, a retrieval agent that is listening to the conversation and at every point in the conversation tries to retrieve information that can help the conversation going on? And in this stage, we actually getting more implicit types of requests, because we have to understand from the conversation. In scientists, we're not asking questions, not even explicit information, just stating things that behind them you might understand that there's some information that's related and we should retrieve so we can help the conversation to continue. It could be for the agents that's discussing, but it also could be between two people, and just a search engine is proactively providing information that's related to that. So I think this is an interesting field that's emerging now with this new devices that we have. I think another interesting aspect that we didn't talk about is we talked about a little bit about language, but now we have so many languages where our technologies are rich. But when we add conversation, there's a lot of culture aspects to it. If we take the retrieval part and we want to show it as a conversational part, how can we have to understand the culture of every country that we show it to maybe better convey the information that we put in the conversation. And I think that's also something that's not touched yet enough, especially because we're mainly looking at English data sets and English evaluation sets, and it would be great to switch from that. And one more thing that I want to raise, and that is, right now we mainly talked about textual retrieval from the conversation, from the search engine, but we can also think about other types of retrievals, like images, right? We can think about image retrieval also as part of a conversational search. What does it mean? To bring up the right image to the query, and which is a part of the conversation. I think that's also a very interesting part.
Yeah, that's a very good point, actually, because different modalities indeed come into play, and then the information, the response to an information need could be an image, for example, and vice versa. And I guess all of these are related to, again, the breadth of the different, how many different the different type of expectations people may have from these systems. I guess, like you were saying, instead of just having an information seeking need, it could be just general engagement, general chit chat, for example. Julia, I guess you mentioned about emotion, for example. People are using these systems some of these systems just to in their everyday interactions, and they, for example, some of the conversational systems seem to be very important for like elderly, for example, just to make them feel better and just to be friends with a system, and they play very different types of roles at the moment as well. So different type of mechanisms or different type of needs come into play there as well. So the search there may not necessarily come from a person looking for a particular information need, but maybe just for a person to keep the person engaged, the system may need to do a search at the background, for example, and then convey it in an emotional in a way that would kind of make the person feel better, for example, or more friendly way, for example. And these are all different aspects of these systems that now become important, together with the different modalities of conveying this information and getting the information need from these people that are not necessarily initiated directly by people. It could be just a natural part of the conversation.
Okay.
Anything? Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I just wanted to add one more aspect. I agree with everything said so far. There is an additional, much bigger opportunity for personalization or adaptation with the systems, right? So conversational in interface invites adapting the presentation for the user, for that conversation session, for that user or for a group of users or for that context, right? And which is obviously possible to do with traditional search, but just much sort of more natural when they speak to an agent, to expect the human agent, they sort of would understand that if you're currently hearing car noises in the background, you don't sort of send them a 25-page PDF document, as an answer, right? So sort of this adaptation again, or sort of knowing what was presented in the past again is possible in other modalities, but I think conversational search sort of interaction and invites this adaptive experience and is expected rather than sort of a static set of results. So.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Idan. Yes, I guess now again instead of just 10 ranked list of blue lists, we do need to think about different way of presenting this information given the context or given the situation of the user, and that's extremely important, I guess, for user satisfaction with these systems. This also made me think about a little bit about the other way around, because when people started using search engines, traditional search engines, I think there was a period of adaptation from users as well. Over time, people started learning about how to issue proper queries. At the very beginning, we weren't necessarily the best at issuing queries. This was a learning experience from the user. And with conversational systems, do you think such a kind of change or adaptation from user point of view will also be happening? Because we mostly expect these systems being used either in a natural language form, for example, or regular search engine query-like form, for example, in some cases. Do you think there may be, as devices are adapting to user needs, do you think users will be adapting as well in what to expect from these devices and what type of questions to ask to these devices, or changing the way they ask questions to these devices as well? Or do you observe this already, or do you think that this won't be happening?
Sure, I can start on that. So I think it's definitely the case, and that's sometimes unfortunate that it's hard to make users to explore what actually the system can do for them. So that's one way of thinking about that. How can we, I don't want to say teach, but how can we show users what a system is capable of doing for you? It's one thing. It's coming back to examples I mentioned with Alexa. So that I've been collaborating with them last summer, and know the fact that most of the sessions are very short because people learn what works and they just continue doing that kind of things. So that's a challenge for actually being able to engage a user in a conversation if it's possible. And as we mentioned, like, for example, the clarifying question and taking additional modalities, like Idan just said, that you can see what's the background noise at the moment, depending on the settings. But I think that one of the difficulties is actually discoverability of those new features which we want to bring to the users. And one of the aspects is actually which was initially, it was not kind of like stated between the lines that system always will, the user is supposed to expect system to return the right answer. And there's not much thought still into the idea that user have a power over saying, no, that's not what I want, or like having an easy way to correct the system. So, and that's something we definitely, I didn't see a lot of research in that. There's definitely some attempts to kind of to study that in Kai community, where they actually show that it's all about efforts. And if you let user know that the system is not really sure, and the user can comment on that, so the user will like to give feedback. So this feedback loop is not really yet used as much. It's not that we're trying, but we don't know. And also because of the different modalities. So the short answer would be that there's definitely issue with discoverability of new skills, and that's something we could definitely research on. And second, how can we take the user feedback into account and also make this feedback clear to the system? What is a positive feedback and what is a negative feedback? Because again, when you take a lot of modalities into account, that's getting difficult.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Julia. I guess from user's point of view as well, the user also needs to learn to give feedback and how to give feedback to the system as well.
And can we provide the interfaces, either language interface, like voice interfaces and text interfaces, that user would be able to provide this feedback? One of the ways it has been done, like in these chit chat systems, is when thumbs down, thumbs up, and emoji, which helped like a lot. But I don't think it's the only way. There's probably other natural ways to do that. So.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Julia. Anyone else who would like to add to this?
I mean, you were asking how people adapt, or do people adapt? I guess I'm thinking about my own family and the way that they use the system. So I see some of them are adapting. I see other ones struggle to do that. I mean, I think it's always worth remembering as computer scientists that we're very, very unusual creatures in that we enjoy learning how these different devices work and get some strange pleasure from figuring out ways of making them work more effectively. Most people just want to get on with their lives. Humans have natural ways of working out the abilities of something. All of you are part of teams. I'm part of a team. We spend a lot of time kind of working out what our colleagues are capable of, what our colleagues are less capable of. So we have lots of natural ways of doing that. It's just that the current conversational systems, can't really tap into that. Those kind of inherent abilities that we have. I don't know how much people will. It kind of depends, right? Some people will adapt if there's a very convenient feature on a conversational system, they might take the time to learn how to use that very convenient feature. But if it's a kind of a nice to have, I don't know how much you can expect people to learn to adapt. Not necessarily.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Mark. I guess it's also related to this example that you gave with the colleagues in a sense, because we learn which colleague is an expert in what, and then we talk about that particular topic with that colleague, and we may not ask about other topics, for example, to the colleague. In a sense, it's kind of similar with the potentially with the conversational systems as well. You may not ask certain questions over time because you can't get a good answer, for example, or you don't ask in a specific way because you know that you won't be able to get an answer potentially. So I agree that we might see this type of an effect. Anyone else who would like to add?
So I think one clear evidence that users are adapting is the fact that they're willing to answer questions that are asked by the agent. This was not done before, right? Till now, we were the active ones, writing what we want, the system will respond, we'll click or do things like that. And suddenly, when we get a question, do you want this? Do you want there? Where you want to go? I didn't know. This is the entity you're looking for? This one, and we're willing to interact with it. I think this is a big change in the way people start perceiving or interacting with a conversational agent. It also, of course, takes us to the other side, because now that you build this kind of intimacy, you're willing to answer questions. A lot of people, by the way, are willing to answer questions, not just navigational ones. Like even if you ask open questions, like chit chat dialogues is a pretty clear one, but even in information dialogues, we've seen these kind of examples. But on the other hand, if you have this kind of intimacy and you have this narrow channel of providing information, so for example, on a voice-only device, you can only say a few sentences out of all the wealth of information you've retrieved somewhere in the back. You have to be very careful of what you're going to say and how you're going to say it, because suddenly, instead of showing a big screen with a lot of search results and you can just browse and look at all the diversity that's there and all the different options, you get just one piece of information, maybe two. And these are the ones that the machine chose for you to hear, right? And this is very, I would say, I don't know if I would say dangerous, but it's really easy to get the users to react to that badly. Oh, why did it say that to me? Or, without, for example, adding endorsements based on, I know this about you because you said it maybe yesterday in terms of personalization, or something like, oh, this is one thing that I have to say, but I have so many other things, or there's other opinions. Then this could easily get to areas like there are biases in the system, something's not working, and we lose the trust that we build.
If I might actually, because I think Idan makes a really excellent point, and it's something that I've always thought about with systems. One of the really clever things when Google first came out back in '98 was that it was a very simple system. I mean, there was lots of sophistication around the back, but it looked very simple. So basically what it did was a Boolean AND on your query words. So you typed in a set of words. It didn't do any stemming. It was very basic, and it would find documents that had all of your words in, and then it sorted them by, whatever, anchor text and other things. So if something went wrong, because it was very clear the way that it worked, if something went wrong with Google, users tended to blame themselves. They would say, oh, I didn't type in the right query. And so they would then try and think of a new query. When you have a system, particularly a conversational system, there's a shift of responsibility. And when the system sort of says, I'm just going to give you 10 results, I'm not going to do a Boolean AND on your query, it sort of implies I'm going to listen to you and I'm going to try to help you and I'm going to give you an answer. The responsibility shifts. And the person doesn't really feel, the user, I think, feels less inclined to blame themselves and more inclined to blame the system. I've seen this in a number of systems. The Apple Newton, they're really showing my age now. The Apple Newton said, we will recognize your handwriting. And when the Newton got it wrong, you blamed the Newton, not yourself. When the Palm Pilot came out, they said, if you want to do handwriting recognition on the Palm Pilot, you must write in this very specific way. When you used it and you got it wrong, you blamed yourself. So there's this sort of interesting shift. And so the systems now, these conversational systems, are taking on a responsibility of where the blame lies when things go wrong. And that just makes it, I mean, it's right to do that in a way because we want these systems to help us out more. But it means that when things go wrong, people tend to blame the system rather than themselves.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting actually, because when you blame the system, then you are less likely to change the way you formulate the query, and then less likely to adapt in that case, which we were seeing before.
But there's also frustration because, from one side, the machine, right, or the agent that's there is trying its best to help you. But, usually when you talk between, humans, you can easily provide feedback in so many ways to help the other side understand, why it's not working, what's wrong. And it doesn't work today with agents. So while we work hard to, summarize information, provide you, this kind of cool features, cool navigational or task-based oriented, we are still, and I think Julia mentioned it, really far behind working on getting the feedbacks correctly and working with the user together to where the user really wants to go.
In a sense, when two humans are interacting, you also understand from the face of the other person that you misunderstood something, for example, or the voice. We do have some of these signals. I don't think we yet fully use them properly with the conversational systems, but you do have limited type of, in a sense, feedback from the user when one side is a system. Although I think that's another research area, how to make use of this type of implicit signals from the users to better correct. And also from the user point of view, for example, maybe how to give very quick feedback to the system so that you get the correct information quicker and the system more quickly understands that it had misunderstood the query from the user. Okay, so one related question to this, that we have been discussing various aspects now, and this has raised actually that it's obvious that the research here involves different communities, input from different communities. Like there is research related to HCI, there is research related to speech, for example, information retrieval, natural language processing, and so on. One challenge is because there are such different research communities involved to make progress in these systems. How do you bring in different communities to work together? Because usually we have different conferences that take this that involve different communities, and we do need mechanisms to make these communities work closely. Even information retrieval and natural language processing, for example, they tend to be quite separated, and only now these communities are trying to come more together. Do you have any ideas or suggestions as to what can be done as conference organizers or as senior members of the community to bring in more researchers to work together from different communities?
I mean, one thing I would say, because maybe I'm the oldest person here, is the communities have come together a lot. I went to ACL in '93 and I barely understood anything that was being talked about. But when ACL was in Melbourne a few years ago, the prize-winning paper, one of our students talked about the prize-winning paper at ACL in Melbourne. It was a ranking paper. It was a sentence ranking paper. So there's actually a lot of commonality across the conferences. Perhaps the bigger challenge is that if one of my students is planning on submitting to EMNLP, and so she's got to be looking at a very wide range of conferences. So I'm not denying that you're right, that there's a sort of a large amount of different work going on across the fields, and I suppose that's perhaps the biggest challenge for us is that there's a growing agreement on the methodologies that we use. So we ask users to provide us with naturally specified information needs. We decide that the best way to identify those answers to those needs is to sort things from very large databases. And we use some sort of, deep learning, machine learning driven method. And so because we're all converging on common views about how to solve these problems, a large number of different conferences are all using broadly similar techniques, which means our students have to go and look at a very wide range of different forums to publish in. Is there a need for a conversational search conference? I don't know. It would be interesting to try one and see. I suppose the other solution would be what Eugene's doing with the Alexa task. That was very interesting. A gang of our students have put in a bid. We'll see whether they're successful. What was fascinating was to see the very wide range of students wanting to have a go at that Alexa task. And that was very exciting to see students from right across my school wanting to be part of that. So maybe those kinds of industry challenges are a way of drawing people together.
Thank you, Mark. This is music to my ears to hear that there was a sort of wide range of students applying. And yes, we're eagerly reading the proposals. So I think that's one way, and Trek has been one way of successfully driving people to work on shared tasks, and going back way, and Julie and others have mentioned already, right? That there's I think having a shared task is one way to bring different people together. I want to also talk about reducing barriers. I think there's some perception in both communities, NLP and IR, that the other one is more insular and it's harder to get papers into the other conference because of the different baselines or the different sort of expectations on methodology, and it's kind of hard to sort of coming from, say, IR world to publish an NLP conference, or the other way around. So maybe, and again, this is, so I'm not sure how to remove these barriers, but I think that's one way to perhaps encourage participation, is to maybe sort of have more shared tasks, shared baselines, shared data sets, right, that are sort of accepted in different communities, because I think there's still a gap there, and I'll stop there.
I guess conferences being more open, maybe more explicit about in the call for papers, even we could. There's been some kind of initiatives about this, but maybe we should try to broaden this, because I also feel that there is this reaction and kind of a feeling that another community is more. It's more difficult to get papers accepted into, or more closed. Maybe people see, I think, certain communities more closed and they have more reaction to accept different types of papers. I think, I think people have slowly recognized this, and there is this drive towards being more open and more acceptive towards different communities. But about this, the point about Alexa, like the application for Alexa Prize, I think that's actually one of the great ones, isn't it? Because because when you write such proposals, you have to think about the different dimensions of the system, and then the different components of the system do require different researchers come together and then write a proposal together. I guess when you think about building a final system yourself as a group, it does in a sense force you to to work with other researchers from different fields. So I agree that that's one of the great ways perhaps to bring in the communities together. So we have a few questions actually from the audience. So one question is, could you comment on multimodal conversational systems? So we see a strong need of such systems for manufacturing, where, for example, language conversation is only a small part of conversation, and where the emphasis is more on the touch, visual, occasional speech input, and visual and alert type of input. Do you have any comments about devising such systems? What are the challenges, or what are the aspects involved there?
I can start on that. Like, there's actually a lot of progress has done in this respect from robotics community. So they really spend, like, there's recent papers on framework, if I'm not mistaken, called Empathic, where they try to collect the facial recognition, try to collect the gestures to provide to the agent immediate feedback on what the agent is doing. Or at the moment, I think the moment was mostly about actually providing a conversation. So I think the challenges here is the data collection in a way. So we already. So just collecting the data set of bringing up like this textual conversation is hard. And if you add another modalities, data set collection getting very complicated, not only from perspective of cost, but also from perspective of legal. So that's one of the challenge, and also the further testing as well. So we don't have a well thought through format for that.
Mm-hmm. Thanks,
I
Julia.
mean, look, oh no, please,
No, please
Eugene,
go ahead.
you go.
No.
I'll just briefly say that I agree it's a huge challenge, and it's actually, we talked about multimodal on sort of the output side, but the input side also varies. And I think one of the sort of, at least the thing, the system has to be ready to switch modalities without warning, right? So while a user might be touching the screen on the one turn, right, the next turn they might be using voice to navigate because their hands are busy driving, this time. So a system really has to be ready to switch modalities with every turn of the conversation, right? And even potentially mixing them at the same time. So I think I agree, it's a really exciting challenge. And I don't think we really have a good answer, right? So yet of how this will work out. So Alexa Prize is one way we will investigate this, and hopefully many future sort of opportunities. But thanks for raising this.
Look, I was just going to say, I think one of my old PhD students, Johanna Trippas, I think has just got a paper at SIG-IR, published, I think, the list of papers from SIG-IR, and I'm pretty sure she's working with someone at UMass on this particular topic. And in fact, we were chatting to her just the other day about how we could take that work forward. And we've got some ubiquitous computing people at RMIT, and we're talking about whether we could bring those groups together. Just to sort of look at one aspect of thinking about these kind of multimodal systems, because there could be a range of different modes. I'm not quite answering the question that's been put on the chat, which is probably thinking more about the immediate interaction. You've got your Google Home or whatever, and it's got a screen and you can speak to it and you can touch some buttons and so on. But there's a range of multimodal inputs. Eugene was talking about driving, so a GPS or accelerometers could be picking up interesting information for that. So I think it's a huge topic area, and it probably goes back to what you were asking previously, M&A, about how you bring different fields together, because we're talking about sort of getting a much wider range of inputs and collaborations with researchers that we're probably not used to working with, at least in academia anyway.
Yeah, I would also add that you might also, in terms of sensing the input around, even for just the voice, you can see if the environment is noisy or not, even if you're not in a car and you're just working with your phone. But maybe you have your earphones in, and if you do have your earphones, then you're more willing to get the input as voice, while if you don't have the earphones and it's really noisy, you might get the input on the screen. So all these kinds of detecting the right environment is critical. But also in terms of the types of people who are interacting, like if it's a kid looking at the screen, if the kid is more interested in talking to the device while showing like cool images just as an accompaniment of the dialogue, or whether it's an adult looking and it's like easier to click instead of talking, or maybe because I'm just messing, I heard something, I don't really follow what it is, I come back to the screen, I look at it, and then I continue the conversation, things like that. So I think personalization here is also critical to use the device in different ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess the different way of the input side is not something that people have done too much research on, I guess, in a sense, which is raised in here throughout the discussions. And the input indeed could be an image itself or a touch itself. And we have mainly been discussing like voice or textual input, but this is something definitely that throughout our discussions on like what research topics are open and what research challenges remain, I guess it looks like this is one of the most important research challenges that needs more thought potentially. So we have one more question from the audience. How do you see common sense reasoning technology to get integrated into conversational systems, especially for situations where the dialogue needs to be properly understood by the computer, so you care a lot more about precision, getting an accurate answer, and the emphasis then maybe less on recall side?
So that's look. I'll start by just saying I don't know, because that common sense reasoning is something that information retrieval hasn't really tried to do, and so it's not something that we've. Well, there have been attempts in sort of medical retrieval systems, but those are kind of classic old AI approaches where you sort of encode those reasonings using, knowledge structures. But I can see where it makes a lot of sense. And actually it highlights quite a lot of information retrieval, sometimes gives the wrong impression of actually being very successful. Just because Google and Bing work very well, it doesn't mean that IR is great. Just go to any university website search engine and see how bad search can be. And a lot of the reasons why that search isn't terrible, well, there's a bunch of reasons why that search isn't working very well, but one of them is actually in some ways a lack of integration of common sense reasoning about that organization. So it's a side of things that information retrieval has not been tremendously good at incorporating.
So I agree completely, and I want to add that once again, going back to the ubiquitous or ambient sort of presence of the assistants, right? As the tasks become more grounded, right, or require interacting with the real world and not just only information, common sense reasoning or causal reasoning has to be critical in this, right? So, as you're giving people advice, the advice has to not hopefully burn down their house or step out of the window. So I think it will become absolutely critical as we support real world sort of interactions or grounded interaction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I can also narrow down common sense. There's so many into it, but we can also think about the user's world in a way that helps the user saying things more personal. So call my aunt. I expect the device to know who my aunt is because I provided it maybe somewhere before, or maybe the collection of information that the history of the conversations that I had years ago should be somehow or maybe expected that from the agent to understand better things that I would say implicitly, and that could be also part of the common sense, and it's in a way simpler than understanding the things that we're talking about common sense, like very sophisticated logic. We're still even not there at the end, but I think that their information retrieval can help if we can organize this ambient knowledge of this personal information and retrieve and help that as part of the retrieval engine. That could also be useful.
I guess this question is also related to the different communities coming together again, because there's been some work in like common sense reasoning, except not much in the information retrieval side, but from other communities. So this is a question that I think does require different fields working very closely together as well. But it's definitely something that needs to be further explored. We have one more question from the audience. So the question is, I can see that conversational systems can have broad applications like robotics and self-driving cars, but I couldn't imagine how conversational search will take place of traditional search paradigms. For example, I feel like it's a bit weird to interact with my phone in the public or my laptop in the office. So what are your opinions in the roles of conversational systems in our future everyday lives?
I think bringing conversational system doesn't mean that we cancel the all traditional sort of web search. Can live together. I think it was a very nice paper a couple of years ago, actually at SIG IR, where they compare the different types of queries people search with the voice, like using the voice interface and using the like when they're typing. There was tremendous difference in terms of, and also when and how the voice has been used. So, and just my 5 cents would be like bringing conversational search doesn't mean we cancel all what happened in IR before. So it's definitely one of those aspects where you decide, depending on your context, like what is the best possible solution at the moment. When I'm probably in a public transportation, so I would use my typing my searches. If I'm cooking something in my kitchen, like an Alexa is here, it's much easier because my hands are kind of used, and that's actually probably just exactly switch of the modalities, which again doesn't cancel the web search at all. Let's not cancel something that works well.
So I don't know. I think keyword search should not. I understand it's convenient for typing, but I think if we're talking about the privacy constraint of using voice, there are other solutions, and I think I don't think the sort of traditional sort of type-based search will really be used much in the next, say, decade, after the next decade or so, just because it's just so much faster for most people to say something than to type, and if there's a privacy issue, then fine, so microphones will get better at picking up whispers or something, so that's my view, that sort of conversational search will take increasingly larger share of the search market, or voice-based search, and I guess we'll see what happens.
I think also because these devices, like all home devices and others, are starting to be really ubiquitous, right? Everybody's home. It's just easy, that you're sitting in your living room, suddenly, something pops up in your head. You want to get information. Just go say, hey, whoever this device name is, give me this information about this, or ask a question. And it's, you don't have to walk to your laptop or desktop and open it and start typing. It's more direct, and people are using it more and more. I think that it's already, there's a big change there. Kids are growing into this environment again, like from age 1. It's there all the time. They use it for so many things that it's just going to be their main way of interaction with the world.
But on you go.
Please.
Go ahead.
I'm only laughing because one of the challenges with conversational search, conversations over these things, is just those gaps. The thing I was going to say, I was going to say that I do sympathize with the questioner. I will just say again, go on YouTube and search for Knowledge Navigator and look at the Apple version from '87. It's quite an interesting idea of what they think the ideal system could be, and it's multimodal and all sorts of things. But I'm actually sitting in the corner of a very big space downstairs, and there's a kitchen there, and the kids are watching TV. And there's not a very big door, but not a very good soundproof door. And I was not using a conversational system the other day, but I was dictating, because I find the dictation systems from Google and from Microsoft are astonishing these days. And I was dictating an email to someone, and I can't remember what the subject was, but a couple of hours later, my kids were going, "What on earth was going on with you? You were telling somebody off for something, or you were complaining about something." And I realized, that they could hear everything that I'd been talking about. So I get what you're saying, and it's an interesting thing. I mean, to broaden this out slightly wider, the pandemic and the fact that probably most organizations are going to be switching to people working from home and sometimes working in their offices is going to change the way that offices are laid out. All those people who used to fight for having their own little private space may lose now because they're only going to be coming in 2 or 3 times a week. But on the other hand, if we're going to have to have conversations with systems much more frequently, again, it may change the dynamics of things. Maybe Eugene will get his whisper mic and then we'll all be fine. But it is actually a very interesting question. There has been a level of privacy in typing, and these conversational systems change the way that works.
Yeah, I guess the answer to this question also depends on, it goes hand in hand with the quality of the systems, right? As the quality of the systems get better and they get better in answering certain needs, then they may get more embedded. And over time, we will indeed see expectations or how the usage patterns between these type of systems change as systems change. So we have one more question from the audience, which is, will the appearance of systems like GPT-3 impact conversational systems?
I think they already
Yes.
Yeah, yes. I guess so.
They are there. They already impacted a lot.
And probably more is coming. These are like good examples of this joint work or different communities affecting each other and improving the systems based on that. But more is coming, I guess, on top of GPT-3.
But I think it's also it's a good, like, language models that reach this level of capabilities. They're really impressive, but from the other end, start raising questions of how much they can be trusted when we used to search and see everything there and read ourselves and understand. And on the other hand, now somebody's throwing in something that's supposedly be correct because it's hidden within its parameters. If you actually understand what it does, it's becoming harder to trust it. So I think that there's a lot of mechanisms to build to help users believe in what these systems say in terms of not just the fun interaction, but the correctness. And I think it will not end in just building larger models, because first of all, data is getting fresher all the time, right? So if a game ended an hour ago, can you update a GPT-3 quick enough to incorporate this information? Right? If there are elections and Biden is now the new president, would GPT-3 know that Biden is the new president because it was trained maybe before that? I'm not sure about this. So there'll be a lot of work on, I think, both improving, of course, the scale and the quick of updating mechanisms, but I think also integrating search into them, and that's going to be an interesting challenge.
I think the thing that it actually cuts back to the question that was asked 2 questions ago about common sense reasoning. These language models are great at picking up not really common sense reasoning, but sort of the way that people can behave, which isn't necessarily commonsensical. And so you could have those 2 things sort of being forces against each other. I was quickly skimming a paper that one of my students discovered. That was published in, I think, Information Processing and Management last year, that was looking at things like gender bias in search engines and search engines with language models tended, not always, but tended to have worse gender bias problems than sort of traditional search engines. So, so the things like GPT-3 are certainly very interesting, but they also bring negatives as well as positives.
Yeah, I guess bias is a major issue there indeed, and keeping them fresh is another challenge. There is still a lot to be done regarding GPT-3, but I do think that they have already affected indeed the quality of systems, its information retrieval, for example, or web search as well in general, search in general, a lot. But there are several issues that still needs to be solved there. So one other question I had related to overall research that's being done in the field, especially focusing on academia, for example. One challenge that we see, and it's not just academia, this is affecting the general research in the field, is the lack of public data sets or that we could use for training and evaluation of conversational systems. So several questions I have there. One is from academic side. Do you see this as an issue as well? And do you see that as a major blocker? And from industrial point of view, are there any initiatives that you have from the industrial side to release any data sets, any such public data sets that the community could make use of?
So am I the only academic, or you and me, Eminem? Although you're half Amazon, right? So I'm the
yeah.
and
Eugene as well.
So I'm the only pure academic. You guys are all Amazon half time. Look, to a certain extent, I find myself thinking that. Of course, it would be nice to have more data. You know, actually, the students I've got working on things at the moment, I've got, you know, the successful papers we've had have been things like eye tracking studies of the way that people interact with conversational systems. We've had students looking at stack exchange data to kind of understand the way that humans interact with each other. And then Microsoft has released some really cool data sets. So we've got a student working on a clarification question data set. The name escapes me for the time being. So we've not been looking too much for data sets. And it's always an academic problem of getting access to data. I think, you know, the solution is always to think of problems that the industry isn't working on. And in fact, you know, we can often look at things that industry can't do. I think the solution is generally, you know, sure, if industry wants to give us more data, we'll take it. But I think in general, the solution is to try to think of problems that industry isn't working on. You know, they're actually quite constrained. They have to work on products. And they have, you know, there are restrictions on what they can do with users. So whereas we can, you know, with ethics approval, get much more complex, nuanced, smaller data sets created that then enable us to go and study things. So, you know, yes, it'd be lovely to have more data, but doesn't prevent academics from researching this field.
Mm-hmm. Eugene, would you like to add anything?
Sure. So, I mean, I guess I'm going to take the opportunity, I guess, to promote the Alexa Prize, but it's one of many initiatives, or I think many possible initiatives that could be done, where to allow academics to interact with real users, right? So yes, it introduces constraints, as Mark said, but at the same time brings in the opportunity to encounter broad range of questions, interaction, you know, types and users, right? And the way to do it, right, is to have some sort of shared platform, right, where the academics or whichever, right, kind of like Kaggle, but with real users, right, where you can submit your system to interact with people. And I think, you know, it'd be lovely to have more such opportunities, you know, in addition to the Alexa Prize one, where again, sort of that's the benefit. You can run thousands of experiments, right, easily, with, you know, users sort of naturally interacting with the system, you know, within the constraints of the platform. So I guess you asked me what the industry could do. So I think, well, more of what we're doing, right? So allow systems to interact with real users. I don't think there's in any conceivable universe that more data could be released, right, for various privacy and trust sort of reasons. But, you know, getting academics to interact with users through a restricted window would be probably the best, in my opinion.
I would also add that, you know, because of privacy issues, I mean, even we ourselves are not really can look at, you know, conversations from real users just because of privacy issues, right? So again, even if you go with Alexa Prize and we can expose academic systems to real users, it's really hard to build data sets out of that, right? So I think, and especially when we talked before, how we can combine together with end-to-end you know, environments, you know, different disciplines to work together. It would be good if we could have something like that, in an academic environment where we can actually show the dialogues, provide more guidance for the users to actually interact and get more I don't know, feedback that's worth in the academia. Otherwise, I mean, there are a lot of benefits of going to real users, learn from them, and provide them in a more aggregatable way. But there's still a lot of limitations when we do it in real users from the industry versus what we can do in academia.
Yes, and I would add to that to the compliance, even in industry, you cannot even look at the data. So I think one way of also thinking about is what kind of interaction can we log from the user, not just in text, but also as we, for example, have been working with different aspects of conversational search. We always, as soon as we collect the data, we releasing them. Like I think the last year we released 2 data sets related to conversational search, but that was collected from the crowdsourcing platforms. And I think in this case, we're kind of having the same situation among academics and academic researchers in the industry labs. So like we have a crowdsourcing platform which can be used for collecting this data set and exploring the new features. Because as also Mark mentioned before, sometimes like if you want to do the research, you need to explore something which has not been done on the product yet. And for that, it's about how clever can you set up the task to collect this data from crowdsourcing platforms. And what Eugene is doing with Alexa Price is truly amazing. And I think it's you can learn a lot of platforms. And I wish we have more platforms to deploy the system rather than benchmarking, because benchmarking also comes with negative aspects to that. And for that I almost voting for something that we have a platform where everyone can deploy the system, and then the crowdsourcing workers or like this particular community who is interested in this particular platform can give you feedback, and that will really drive us to the next step when the deployment of such system would be easy.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Julia. I guess Alexa price has been raised multiple times. Now, Eugene, would you like to give just a little bit more detail about how Alexa price works? We don't have, unfortunately, too much time, but it would be great just to have a little bit more details about Alexa price.
Sure. Okay, if I can just share a screen, it might be faster to show it than to speak. So let's see if I can do that. I'll just share my entire screen. Oh, I can't share a screen. I don't think I'm allowed. Okay, I'll just accept the limitations, the limited modality. I guess if somebody, whoever is the host, if you could allow me, then I'll change. But yeah, so the main thing is that, as so implicitly said, Alexa Price provides a platform to redirect user traffic based on invocation to academic participants, and then within that sandbox, the academic system can do more or less whatever they want with the user, of course, with the expectation that they're trying to help them somehow. And at the end of the conversation, the control goes back to the framework and it requests user feedback or rating. And after, say, 4 years of the Alexa Price social bot, there is one more called TaskBot to help users accomplish tasks. But the main point is that there's the same platform is used where users are asked for feedback in the moment, right? Right after they complete the conversation, which about 1/3 to a quarter of the time they do provide. So which is like really high. So you actually have both implicit and explicit feedback from the users, which is then can be used to rate the systems, and those ratings are provided to the participants so they can improve the systems. So the details are all on if you go to to alexaprice.com website, you can get more details about the current challenge and the past challenges. And following on what Julie said, there's actually been some crowdsourced data sets provided in the social bot domain, and we hope one day to produce similar data sets for task completion, but not this year probably. One interesting aspect of this is that the users are consent to participate, right? There's a warning given to them that this is an experiment, like a competition. So and that kind of reduces some of the constraints that, yes, the students and others can actually look at the data more easily, because the users actually are explicitly agree to participate in this sort of experimental evaluation. But nevertheless, those data sets cannot be released publicly, unfortunately. So, sorry I spoke for so long. I guess, again, please go to the website. There is sort of virtual roadshow with the slides about previous Alexa Prize competitions and the current one available there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eugene. I guess we are a bit running out of time, overtime already, actually. Thank you very much for the detailed explanation about Alexa Prize. Again, if anyone is interested, please go to the website. And I would like to thank all the panelists here very much for all the discussions, and for also taking the time. I know for different panelists it was really bad timing in the middle of the night, very late, but they still took the time. And thank you everyone for the great conversation. I guess we overran because it was such an interesting conversation. And thanks to the organizers as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, sponsor.
Hey.